cultivating partnerships, in-row weed control options for farmers large and small. As part of a generous grant through North Central SARE, the Brainerd Lab at Michigan State University has worked over the last year to gather valuable information on past and current knowledge on in-row weed control. This video series is the culmination of that effort. In early 2017, the Brainerd Lab, along with 3 Midwestern vegetable farmers, visited with researchers, manufacturers, and farmers in Switzerland, France, and the Netherlands, and learned how they effectively use mechanical weed control machines that are largely produced in those regions. The information on the FlexTine cultivator, finger weeder, and torsion weeder provided in these videos come from applied research done by the Brainerd Lab, trials of our farmer partners carried out over the 2017 growing season, and the information we gathered through our travels in Europe. We hope that the expert advice we share here will assist growers in the U.S. in both choosing the best equipment for their system and using it effectively. This is the torsion weeder. It consists of 2 opposing tines made of spring steel set in the soil. As they are pulled through the soil, the tension on them causes them to vibrate, uprooting small weeds. The torsion weeder was invented by the Bezarides brothers in California in the 1970s. These models are colored blue and red. The Frato company in the Netherlands redesigned the tool in the late 90s and still sell it today. Several European companies make torsion weeders, including Frato, Steketee, and Hach. The Bezarides brothers are no longer making their torsion weeders. Modern European models have tines 7 or 9 millimeters in diameter, whereas the Bezarides models were much thicker. 1 row of modern torsion weeders costs about $300 per row.
This is Theo Remige of the Frato Tool Company outside of his showroom in the Netherlands. He showed us how the torsions are mounted on parallel linkages and are run behind sweeps for best effect. He described how they work by vibrating as they are pulled through the soil and uprooting small weeds. We visited a farmer in the Netherlands who uses a multi-row torsion weeder on chicory grown from seed. He showed us his machine and described how after a pre-emergence herbicide, when the chicory is a few inches tall and weeds are very small, he runs through with the torsion weeder to uproot small weeds. This is Koos Havelaar of the Hach Tool Company in his factory showroom in the Netherlands. He showed us the many different adjustments on his torsion weeders and how each adjustment makes the tool more or less aggressive.
Our torsion weeder is also mounted on the knife. Every hoeing machine has a knife, so it's really simple to mount on every hoeing machine.
Okay.
And we can adjust this in many ways. And the easiest way is moving it up and down on the shaft. So another way is tilting the device. So if you move this off the shaft and you tilt the tines, it will be more aggressive at the end of the tine.
Okay, so I know some growers run them parallel to the ground, but you're saying if we tip them up, that makes it a more aggressive action, and if we tip it down, it's less aggressive.
Less aggressive.
Okay.
Yes. And you have 2 ways of using the machine. When we ship it, it's a bit apart from each other, so they're not overlapping.
Okay.
You can reverse it, that this one and this one will be equal. You have to change the tines, but then they're on the same level.
Yeah.
So this is the most aggressive way of adjusting the torsion weeder.
And similar to the finger weeders, when they're offset, it's less aggressive.
It's less aggressive.
Okay.
And then, of course, you can give them an overlap or give them a bit of space.
Okay, of course.
You can give them a lot of pressure towards the crop. And there's another way of when you mount this on the tip of the bracket, it's slightly less aggressive because the angle changes.
Okay, so if I have this here and loosening this nut, I change the angle.
Yeah. So most aggressive is this angle and an overlap at the same position.
Okay.
And the least aggressive is this angle with a bit of space between the tines.
The most important part of using in-row cultivation tools effectively is the setup and calibration of that tool for your specific conditions. Adjustments can vary widely depending on crop, weed pressure, soil type, and climate. Making sure to set aside space and time to understand the tool and make adjustments to optimize the tool's effectiveness for different conditions will help you get the most out of your investment.
My name's Sam Hitchcock Tilton. I'm going to be talking about the torsion weeders. Different kinds are available for different crops and soil conditions. For example, this tine is 9 millimeters thick, thicker than this, which is 7 millimeters. We use a thinner tine for use on more tender crops, and people would want to use a thicker tine on either more vigorous crops, bigger crops, or where your soil conditions are different. Say you're dealing with a heavier clay, you might want a thicker tine versus on a lighter sand like we have here in Michigan, where we could get away with a thinner tine. There's also differences in the shape of the torsion weeders themselves. This is a newer model, and you can see that there's steel welded on the tips of the tines. And that is so when it's coming through the soil, you can do a little bit of hilling as well. We talked about the way that the torsion kills weeds is by uprooting them. Well, if this comes through the soil and also puts soil into the row, it can bury as well. As been said before, it's crucial to have the size difference between the crop and the weed. Let's take a look here in these sugar beets that are about 3 weeks old and see how we might find success or failure running through them with the torsion weeder. Looking close to the row here, we see our sugar beets, 2 true leaves about 2 inches tall. And here I see some very small purslane. Now obviously there's a size difference there, and I would assume, especially by doing a little tug test, confirming that the beets are better rooted than this small purslane. And so I would assume that I should be able to bring the torsion weeder through the soil and apply a force that will vibrate and uproot the small purslane, but leave my beet crop. However, further up, I see these grasses that are just as big, if not bigger than my beet crop. Again, tugging on them, I see that for these particular plants, if many of my weeds are these smaller purslanes, I can expect to meet good success by using my torsion weeders. However, if in my field I have a lot of these grasses that are bigger than my beets, these tools are not magic, and I would not be able to adjust them in a way to remove the grass weeds without removing my sugar beet crop. You'll notice that the knives and the torsion weeder itself are mounted on parallel linkages. This allows the tool to float and respond to the changing topography of the ground. Because it's on a floating parallel linkage, you cannot control this by raising the toolbar up and down, because it will just float wherever the parallel linkage goes. So to change this depth, we want to change it here, and this allows us to raise the torsion closer to the ground, increasing ground pressure, or of course we can raise it higher as well. The next adjustment we can make is here on the back side of the torsion weeder. Here's the knuckle. The bolt can be loosened or tightened, and then the tine can be raised up out of the soil, or as I was explaining before, is preferred down into the soil. When the end of the tine, what I might call the business end of the torsion weeder, would be parallel to the ground, you can see that the entire length here is going to be moving soil. And at times that might move too much soil here and pull soil into the row, hilling a tender, smaller crop. If you're able to tilt it down into the soil, you can see how less of the tine is moving soil and a smaller tine area is just working the area right next to your crop. We talked about adjusting the tool up and down into the soil. We talked about adjusting the angle of the tine into the soil or parallel to the soil. And then of course, there's the tine itself and the overlap into each other. When we're adjusting the angle of the tines themselves, what we're thinking about is overlap. Of course, the more that the tines are overlapped, the more aggressive it will be. And the less that the tines are overlapped, or even no overlap at all, the less aggressive the tines will be. In particular, we have two bolts here. One in the front that pins the torsion weeder into position, and one here in the back that acts to keep it in position. And so I can loosen one and move it all over laterally, and I can also adjust it side to side in order to make more or less overlap. Once I have it where I want it, this back piece here, I will pull the torsion all the way to the front, and I will keep that back piece flush. Then I will tighten both of them. The role of this back piece is so that when it is tightened, the torsion weeder cannot come out of adjustment either left or right. I've found that there's three crucial adjustments that affect how the tool functions. One would be the overlap of the tines. For very young crops, say carrots that are 3 weeks old and have their first true leaf, beets that are 3 to 4 weeks old, a rule of thumb that we've found is to start with 1 inch of row overlap, which means from the row, I have 1 inch of tine this way and 1 inch of tine that way. I start there, and from there I can kind of tune it in. So that first crucial adjustment would be tine overlap to change aggressiveness. The second crucial adjustment would be the speed of your tractor that you're driving, and that also thankfully is the easiest to adjust. We've found in tender crops like carrots and beets that our ideal speed is between 2.5 to 3.5 miles an hour. And indeed, that's consistent with what the European research has found as to the appropriate speed for this tool. Above 3.5 miles an hour, the aggressiveness of the torsion weeder seems to decrease. As you might imagine, the faster that we drive, the further apart the earth spreads these apart and the further they are from the row. And in addition, below a speed of 2.5 miles an hour, the aggressiveness also decreases. So there seems to be a sweet spot below and above which the aggressiveness will decrease, and in that sweet spot, which to us seems to be 2.5 to 3.5 miles an hour, the aggressiveness will increase. Farmers and manufacturers are telling us that with a lot of these in-row tools, torsion weeders, finger weeders, you want knives running ahead of the tools to loosen the soil so that the tool does not have to work a wide width of crusted soil. The smaller the uncultivated in-row area, the better, obviously. General kind of practices for the knives is about 4 to 5 inches space between them. Your soil conditions will kind of dictate how closely you can bring them. If I have cloddy soil or a little bit of too much of residue and my knives are close to the row and I get up to any sort of speed, I'm going to start pulling soil into the row and hilling. So of course, with all these tools, bed preparation is key, all the prior steps. Another thing to remember, of course, with all these adjustments is the depth of the tool into the soil. A cardinal rule that I like to remember with weed control is that 90% of weeds germinate in the top 1.5 inches of soil. What that tells me is that if I continue to work the top 1.5 inches of the soil throughout the season, I can exhaust the weed seeds in that level. However, if I'm continually working deeper levels of soil, I bring up new weed seeds. One weakness of the torsion weeder is that it does very fine work that depends absolutely on the texture of the soil. These particular torsions were developed in the Netherlands, an area famous for very flat fields and also homogeneous soil that used to be seabed. And so they can run acres upon acres where they don't encounter a stone, where it's completely flat, and where the texture of the soil does not change. For our American conditions, often people are dealing with fields that are not homogeneous. One part of the field might be sandier, another more prone to crusting with clay soil, and maybe still another have small stones. And as that soil changes, you can imagine that the soil physics changes, that the force needed to move and uproot those weeds changes. And so that necessitates frequent adjustments of the torsions. So for people who have many small plantings of crops, for people who have very variable soil, the torsion weeder may not be the best in-row tool. However, for areas that are flatter and more homogeneous in soil type, the torsions can be run for some time without needing to be readjusted. When you get ready to use your tool, there of course there's many details to attend to. For example, we have our parallel linkages here, but where are the wheels running? If I have it spaced out too far, the wheel will be running in the tire track, and the tire track is not indicative of the ground level where my crop is. Right now, I'm not very happy with where it's going to run. You can see that it's running just on the edge of the bed, and it will be running over the divots that the tire leaves, which is not uniform and does not represent what's going on in the row. As you might imagine, looking at the ground, I'm not impressed with what this tool just did. We got some crumbling of the soil, but there's still a very wide width of uncultivated soil on either side of my beets. What might have caused that? Of course, this is a moist, heavy clay soil, so it's going to take more force on the torsions to move that soil. Here I can see this tine down into the soil almost an inch deep. That's too deep for the torsions. They're not getting close enough to the row. Let me excavate a little more. Let's look at our tine tips. We're about 6 inches apart. That's far too far apart to get close and crumble that soil right next to the crop. That tells me that I need to increase my overlap and decrease my depth so that the tines are riding just below the surface of the soil. So to change our depth without having to mess with nuts and bolts for just a slight adjustment, we shortened the length of our top link. What that did was took our toolbar and pulled it up just a little bit, took our tine a little bit higher into the soil. Let's see how that works. This is the kind of crumbling that I want to see from the torsion weeder, where little weeds will be uprooted. I'm still not happy. There's this small area about an inch wide that the torsions are still not working. Let me address that by driving a little faster. That was at 1.5 miles an hour. Let's increase it to 2.5 and see if we can get the torsions working all the way to the middle of that row. This is what I would hope to see out of the torsion weeder. We're on a lighter, sandier soil. It's got some moisture in it. Here you can see the line where the knives were working, and here the torsions worked all the way into the row. Notice the crumbled soil all the way through. Here's a small grass weed that's been uprooted. You can see, of course, that it's much smaller than the beet, and so I would assume that if I can adjust my tool correctly, I should be able to uproot this smaller grass weed while leaving my much larger beet. As we said before, the torsions are capable of very fine work, and in the right soil conditions, we're able to see the kind of work that they can do. I've got the pleasure to be talking to Paul Huber, who I've known for many years, and was real happy to get involved in the project. Paul, can you say a few words about your farm and just give some context for what kind of growing you do?
Yeah, so we're a diversified vegetable farm, and we grow basically all the vegetables that you can grow in the northern climes. We operate a CSA farm, we sell at farmers markets, and we sell to restaurants.
About how many acres are you growing on?
About 2.5.
And so you get a European tool out of the box, and is there a booklet of how-to with it, or what do you do when you get this tool?
That was kind of disappointing. I basically got some crumply sheets of paper that had 2 pictures on it and about 5 sentences. So I think had I reached out to the company, they would have been more than willing to help me with it, but literature was very sparse.
And so walk us through, you open the box, you get this tool, what happens next?
The next step for us was really getting that tool on a toolbar on a walking tractor.
Yeah.
Which was challenging because it's not commonly done, so it was a matter of finding the right clamps.
And Paul, how much did it cost you to get these torsion weeders?
It was about $700 US for a 3-row setup.
I remember talking to you when you were first using the tool and you sounded very frustrated. Can you tell us what it was like getting to know this tool?
The frustration in the tool is, I think, really coming to terms with the fact this is a very much a precision tool. And you have to spend a lot of time dialing it in, getting it right where you want it in terms of the overlap on the individual torsions, the angle that the torsion is entering the soil, and having it be perfectly lined up with your rows.
Yeah.
And once you get that, you know, it's a good tool.
Paul, can you tell us about your experience with the torsion weeder and the many different crops that you grow?
Yeah, we mostly used it on transplanted lettuce, transplanted beets in the paper pot system, and transplanted broccoli. Had success on all those crops. We do grow quite a few different crops, but because of the experience of it not being super flexible when changing to different crops, I really focused on just a few.
And what's your spacing that you're using them on?
We spaced them, our rows are 10 inches apart. That was another thing I kind of liked about this setup was you could go with very tight spacings because these tools are, you know, they're not very bulky, so you can really kind of set them close together.
Can you get into the nuts and bolts at all about adjusting the tool? What types of adjustments did you find were most important or critical?
I found the adjustment to angle the torsions down into the soil was probably the most, well, either that was the most important adjustment or the overlap.
Okay.
All right, so too much overlap and I was ripping plants out.
Yeah.
Too little, I wasn't really doing much cultivating. I go with try to run it about a ½ inch deep in the soil and measuring from the point of overlap from the cross, about 1 inch from the crossover to the end of one tip and 1 inch from the crossover to the other tip. For us to be switching to trying to cultivate 30 different crops within a short period of time really wasn't super practical because of the adjustment you should really be doing for each crop.
And you're saying there's so many different adjustments and so many different nuts and bolts that you can really dial it in correctly, but that it takes a long time.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it's a good tool, but it's not as versatile as others.
And what did you like about the tool, or how did it work well for you?
What I liked was, you know, it was like relatively affordable to have a full setup for 3 rows. It was, I would say, you know, it's a little more, as long as it's set right, a little more gentle. I didn't experience a lot of crop damage.
Okay.
It's lightweight, and I think it has the potential, like I said before, when I'm adding complementary tools, because it doesn't take up a lot of space,
right,
there's some versatility there to add other things to the setup.
And so now you've used the tool for a full season, and what's your reflections? Will it be in your arsenal for next year? Do you need to change it? You're gonna sell it off to someone else to be their problem? Where are you at with the tool?
I don't plan on using it as I did this season. I think it has potential for me to be used in conjunction with another weeder, maybe the finger weeder.
Yeah.
I think you know, for the reasons I gave, where I don't want to have to dial it in for each crop.
Yeah.
Maybe I could set it in a way that it would work fairly well for all crops.
Yeah.
But it would be a second round behind another tool.
Right, right. So instead of trying to set it to get, say, 90% of the weeds, you can set it for 40, but then have some finger weeders or something behind it.
Well, in our system, I was actually riding over the bed with that sophisticated 2x4 that I had on the back.
Where can people get such an element to stand on?
Well, that was probably the longest process. That was probably the hardest import process for me, was getting the 2x4.
Yeah.
I had called several countries.
Wow.
And got several price quotes.
And what does it cost a guy to import that piece of dimensional wood, I guess it was?
I think I was able to talk them down to like $400.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know
which
now.
was a good deal.
I think they're more common now at, say, Home Depot has them for maybe $2
Yeah,
or something.
they're catching on to this European technology.
Right.
Thank you for watching this video on the Torsion Weeder. Please be sure to see our other videos on in-row cultivation tools, profiling the FlexTime cultivator and finger weeder. Thank you to our farmer partners, both in the US and Europe, who shared knowledge and learned with us. A big thanks to our manufacturing and sales partners who informed us on the design and function of the machines we used throughout the project. Thank you to all the participants and organizers of the European Physical and Cultural Weed Control Working Group and the researchers at Wageningen University and Research. And of course, thank you to our funding partners and Michigan State University faculty and staff.